Okay.
So,
Great.
shall I start?
Yes. Let me give you a introduction, a brief introduction. Yes, if I could pronounce your name correctly. Professor Stauskis is actually a professor of urban design at Vilnius Tech, Lithuania. And today we are very happy to have you here to join us. And Professor Stauskis is trained as an architect, urban designer. And as an urban designer, you have planned many residential areas, public and residential buildings in Vilnius city, including historic rehabilitation urban areas. And Professor Stauskis' thesis actually covered aspects of accessibility in modern cities. And he also led the technical aspects of the development regulation for Lithuania. And he also developed and tested accessibility assessment methodology. And Professor Stauskis initiated establishment of the Lithuanian Green Building Council in 2013 and served as the CEO and a board member. He also launched a course in sustainability principles in architecture and Vilnius Tech, and also developed quality assessment system for urban landscapes. He is currently the president of the Lithuanian Association of Landscape Architects, delegate to IFLA and ECLAS. So today, Professor Stauskis will give a talk on landscape for sustainable site selection. Thank you. So
thank you, Sylvia, for a nice introduction. Yes, thank you for inviting me. I see you have a very nice event when you come together and try to brainstorm on different aspects of modern cities. So let me share my presentation with you. So I was nicely introduced, so I will just mention that currently at Landscape Architects Association, we have a group in the, can you hear me well? Can you hear me?
Now it's okay. Just now
is it all fine?
A bit of problem. Now it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. I make it a little bit louder. Yeah. At Landscape Architects Association, we have a group in the Baltic Sea region. You know, the Baltic Sea, there are different countries around. So Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, we have created a group where we're giving continuous professional development. Courses for landscape architects and the others who wish to join. So we're addressing different aspects and the sustainability principles that landscape architects can address. So I see you have a very nice area for your brainstorming, Pok Fulam village in Hong Kong. Never been to Hong Kong. The closest my location was probably Singapore and China. And I learned something about food there, which we had in a previous presentation. We all are interested in. Starting my talk, I would like to say that big or small is the task. We always have to look into the essential problems of modern cities, especially nowadays when we have this difficult situation, pandemic situation, when people have mobility of movement and other complicated issues. So as well-known Dutch practitioner and thinker have betrayed the values of the classical city, and probably in modern classical city probably might be different understanding, but the moment of traditional cities before the Industrial Revolution, before this big sprawl of the 19th century. On the other hand, urbanists and urban designers, urban planners are also in a situation when they have to look for new solutions for completely, as Rem Koolhaas says, newness. we also have to take the courage of risks, courage of making some mistakes, because it is really an unknown path. But on the other hand, it might be the way forward. When ordinary people, I mean, those who are outside from our profession, when they look on some nice picture like the place that you are now focusing on, like Pokfulam, usually people see the surface. When I say the surface, I mean they see the surface of the picture. They see the buildings, see the streets, see some greenery. But for professionals, it's very difficult to, and it's very important to see the overall structure of the place. And as our colleague Tom Turner from London, as he nicely laid it out in 4 levels of patterns. So the primary pattern is something which exists deeply under the layer, which we see in the surface. This is the essential features of the place that were existing on the place even before we people came to that place. And this is geology, ecology, systems, and land topography and geology. Secondary pattern is the first trace that we left on the place, the first installations that were built for the reason of food, shelter, mobility, and security. So these are the first roads, first landmarks, and the first buildings. The tertiary pattern covers the cultural aspects, the way people live on this place. So they are related to things like art and music, which seem sometimes quite far away from urbanism, but they are not so far as it looks. So aesthetic and natural interpretation, mythology and decoration, all these aspects play a very important role in the way the place becomes. And just the quaternary pattern covers the present urban tissue, which is on the surface, as that we all see, the archetypic gardens, blocks of houses, and other elements. So looking in this structure, the place might be very helpful, because if you are able to see these different patterns from the primary to the quaternary, you might be what factors have made the place and how the place could or should be changed. And finally, what makes people judge the place as good or bad. Nowadays, we talk very much about sustainability in different fields. We might start with food, and finally we end in a construction. But we know that sustainability is an invention of the second half of the 20th century. Normally, there were many things in a traditional architecture that I would say are the examples of traditional architecture are completely sustainable, even if the buildings that existed 200 or 300 years ago, they are in all terms quite sustainable. Also, there were different utopian ideas created in the 19th and 20th century, as long as rapid urbanization, development of industry brought pollution, and the life deteriorated in cities. In the picture, upper right picture, you can see how the famous emerald necklace looks today in Chicago. You will know that planned in the city, in the huge city, as a sort of a landscape urbanism, I would say, approach, and it still remains in the city element in overall structure of the town. United Nations have set the global sustainable development goal. This is exactly the field where architects, landscape architects, and urban designers have to put their forces together. I also like very much the picture that was generated by Stockholm Resilience Institute, where they nicely put all these sustainable development goals in a way, as they call, a wedding cake, where society is in the middle, and the priority number 11, sustainable cities, is in the middle. It's attributed to society, to social, but biosphere and all the environment sits around the society. So it nicely shows in which context we all are currently. When we talk about sustainability, of course, climate change is the major issue. Different regions of the world experience it in a different way. We are with you. I'm sitting now in Lithuania, close on the Baltic Sea coast, and we are just had breakfast. We are also in different climatic zones, but these climate change issues, they touch different regions of the world, of course, in different way. So this nice chart says that we have already passed the inevitable threshold, and the limit plus 2 degrees centigrade would bring the rise of sea level and drowning of cities and deterioration of agriculture crops and so on. But sometimes these global climatic changes look very far from a taken person. So I try to personalize a little bit this climate change perspective, and I depicted it on a timeline. I showed when my grandfather was born and when I was born, and then at this time my daughter was born. Then she graduated. By the way, she graduated in fashion design, and this is a very far forecast when hopefully she will retire. So when I look on this perspective, so this perspective also touches me personally, because I am seriously concerned that these changes wouldn't be so high and so risky as they might be. When we talk about sustainability, we should understand also that there are different degrees in sustainability. Most of our current understanding of sustainability might be called being less bad. This means consuming less, polluting less, and that is a good step forward. That's a good first step to do, but this is not the end. In cities, we see that in many places we have already lost natural features like water features, and we have cut lots of green areas. We have developed agriculture fields and so on. So the next step after sustainability, or I would say post-sustainability, would be a restorative approach, when we have to put our attempts and our effort to restore the lost values and lost features. And this is not the end. As modern cities are facing big challenges currently because of deteriorated environment, probably we have to address these lost features, and we have to apply regenerative approach to cities, in the cities, when doing a little bit more than just restore cities to the condition that they existed, doing generating energy and producing agriculture products, being productive landscapes, as we had in the previous presentation. So we can see that there is a long way to go, and different countries, different regions, and different cities, of course, they are probably in different moment of their progress. They have to pave their way towards the restorative and regenerative systems. What does it mean being regenerative? This is a picture how our river in Switzerland, in Geneva district, looked 20 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago. There was a trend, by the way, driven by industrial agriculture in many countries in Europe and in America, and probably in the other continent. Small streams were straightened and they were channelized. So this was the picture of channelized river here in Switzerland. And as you see, there were on the both sides, there were trees planted, and there were alleys, as if nice alleys, and the banks were, but this was conditions, and finally the fertility of the agriculture fields has reduced. So what are our Swiss colleagues and Swiss landscape architects doing? They are creating projects like this, and they are renaturalizing a river in Geneva region. You can see the difference between these two pictures. Yeah, but of course we have to pay now for that. It's quite costly, and it takes time, and it takes effort of many professionals to achieve this result and make the river natural again. World Green Building Council has widely published the positive impacts what human-friendly environment makes on a person. So it dramatically increases our productivity, it reduces hospital days, and it reduces our productivity in our offices and in our labor positions. And probably we know that, but it's not so easy to these goals. is well-known heat island effect. Surface temperature in urban areas raises because of a very big percent of hot pavement. And there is a question what architects and what landscape architects can do in this situation. So if you see the building in the center, it is designed minding the heat island effect. It has a voids and it has elevated layers of the building. And when the heat effect is measured, so these features of the building give very good effect. The temperature is lowered in these areas. While we talk about sustainability, the prime issue that we address include climate change issues and all other greenhouse gases emission. Let me say the structure of the structure of CO2 problem is have three types of CO2. We have embodied CO2, we have stabilized CO2, and we have living CO2. To start with, that is around us, and stabilized CO2 is already embodied in the buildings that exist, and embodied CO2 is in the new building materials that are produced. So depending on the type of CO2, we have different strategy. Of course, we have to use less materials that have high embodied CO2, and we have to use more natural materials. For the stabilized CO2, we have to use like a conversion, renovation, and conservation of existing buildings instead of demolishing them and building the new ones. And living CO2 is a very good thing, and we have to increase it. Therefore, we have to increase amount of green mass in all possible ways. When it comes to site selection aspects, there might be some hesitation. When is architect involved into site selection? As we know, big projects are nowadays created by the groups of specialists, and consultants are involved if the project is developed in a sustainable way. So consultants are involved from the initial steps of the project. And then having a careful look on certain aspects of a site might be very helpful for your client, whoever he is. Is it a municipal body or is it a private investor? So the aspects like local climate is very important thing to looking on the site and evaluating the site. The next important thing is, was this place built up before when you came to the place? Is it a green field or is it a brown field? Connections and the way the site is connected to the context is another very important thing, because the existing connections are always good, but developing new connections might be a very costly exercise. The condition of natural habitats is another feature that should be minded. As we saw in a slide by Tom Turner, the public life traditions, the tertiary pattern of landscape, the way people live on the place and the way they spend their leisure time, the way they communicate, the way they feel the place is a very important aspect again. And of course, the site is related to residences and to workplaces. Lehman has identified several aspects of green urbanism, and let me have a look on them. The first block of features is energy and materials. Energy was the primary element that was brought up concerning the sustainability. But when we talk about energy, we should have in mind a little bit more than the energy which is consumed by the building. We should look on the energy that is embodied during the construction process. And also the way the energy is provided to the place. Is it a centralized provision, or the building is earning some energy by itself by renewable systems? Sometimes we don't feel so much that construction systems that are promoted by the industry, by construction industry, affects our projects and affects the way architects are designing. I have in mind the structural frame that currently is dominated by cast inside concrete slabs and the concrete columns. I have also in mind the huge glazed facades. These systems are developed by a construction industry, and architects very easily take this over. But when we look on the consequences on the impact of these systems, we notice that we should be very careful with this. Talking about materials, we should take in mind also production and recycling of the materials that are used in construction. And of course, energy efficiency is one of the critical features of the building. Also, management of resources is another important thing. Water and biodiversity is another block of issues in the way towards sustainable urbanism. So sustainable urban drain is a well-known system even for the students, for the bachelor students, but it takes a long time and very hard effort to implement that and to bring this to life. In Lithuanian example, we have many problems with our local governments to start implementing these systems. So all aspects related to use of water on site and urban agriculture, as we had in a previous lecture, land typologies, they are all very much affected by water. And the third block of issues is planning and mobility. Of course, mobility is related very much to planning. Probably we know the recent trends and we can observe the recent trends that as you can see in this picture, that shows the reduced driving way and cycling paths installed on a half of the street, which increases sustainable mobility opportunities for the residents. In urban planning and urban design, frequently we focus on high-tech solutions. But let me mention some low-tech is related to low resource and low need of financial resource, also low need of technologies and equipment. And it's really feasible, it's easily feasible by the professionals. So the first thing is strategy based on understanding of local environment. This might seem nice words, but when you look carefully, as you see in this project in Sweden, when the coastal area was developed with new housing and new recreational facilities, helping to develop urban concept. Energy efficiency, in terms that I already mentioned, in terms of maintenance, how much energy is used by the place or by the facility, and the embodied energy in building materials. Sustainable urban drain implemented on the area, and life cycle approach in materials and waste cycle. The next block of simple low-tech measures addresses the building, and one of the main methodic approaches to building design, probably you all know, it's a bioclimatic design, when we especially mind the shape of the building, its orientation, natural ventilation, and natural light provision. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a global goal, and architects have lots of measures in their disposal, starting with material, with amount of increase sustainability level of the building, and also it might increase the quality of life for local community. So all in all, it might help us to develop socially integrated neighborhoods and health and internal comfort for the users. In the second half of the 20th century, it was noticed that many cities are suffering lots of consequences of linear metabolism, so-called linear metabolism. So the task, the major goal for our cities now is moving from a linear, non-sustainable linear metabolism towards a more sustainable secular metabolism, when inputs and the outputs are circulated in a green belt, which should be formed around the city, and instead of discharging lots of waste, liquid waste, gases and cyclic way, and produce a new raw. Modern cities, of course, they face the challenge of modern architecture and landscape, and just minding these aspects might bring us the positive impact when we have modern architecture, modern cities with all their merits, and on the other hand, we have good living standards and good microclimate for the residents. So coming to the essential point of my presentation, optimizing of site potential. The first block of issues is site location. Location, of course, is a very interesting aspect, and real developers take it as a primary, probably the only priority. When they select the site, the location of their investment, they are owner of the location. As they say, very important things for realists. First is location, and the third is location. In this aspect, we can understand that I would say spec role in the city, because if they put just the center would be developed and all the suburbs would be empty. So in this aspect, we have to look for the orientation of the site, which is very important. What is the orientation of the site towards north and south? In this case, I have to mention, for example, in my area, Lithuania, we try to catch southern equator, and you are hiding from sun and creating this. Landscape, condition of the landscape is a very important aspect when we talk about site location. The careful inventory of the existing systems of landscape, and also looking on the primary, secondary, and the tertiary layers of landscape as shown in the initial slide is very important. And in this case, we also can look on the condition and the impact on the ecosystem. What's the condition of the ecosystem on site, and what strategy might we take for future? The connectivity and energy resources are also very important aspects. Developing infrastructure on the site, if it is not existing, might be very costly and very unsustainable. So we have relevant tools to do that, and these are mostly choosing the site which is in the city instead of suburban areas, developing a landscape and integrating it into the context, and using renewable energy sources, also reducing the footprint, the ecological footprint that we might make in the plot. I want to show you this illustration. It's an extract from a Lithuanian geodesy database, and the red dots illustrate the swampy areas or the wetlands or the former wetlands. In some cases, when you are on this place, you can't see them, but the database shows that under the soil there are remnants of ancient riverbed in this place. And then you see on top, you see the construction. So this picture raises the question, do urban planners always analyze properly all the information, and can we protect all these little islands? As you see, in some cases, these islands are protected, they are turned into the area of ponds, but in the other cases, they are developed. We have another interesting project in Vilnius city, when in the new residential area, we have a highway line which was planned 4 decades ago, and currently there is big debate. We need to develop this way in the city, and you see there will be a lot of subsequent development around it. I would call it a hard development, and we turn this place into the infrastructure zone, or we need to find a more sustainable and more green light development, or small mobility, sustainable mobility systems, and more comfort for the residents. The next block of issues is physical safety. It was already mentioned by the previous presenter that physical safety becomes more and more important now. So firstly, there is approach to the place, how we can come on the place. It includes pedestrian and transport aspect. The second important thing is high water. it's difficult to predict it, but there are databases that can help us in that. The next thing is pollution, the existing pollution and the measures that we might control it. Natural extremes, we should collect in all possible data and information, the climatic information about the natural extremes that might be happening on the place, and probable industrial hazards. The tools that we might use is using the right approach and transport options, avoiding wetlands and high water areas, and of course, analyzing carefully how could we reduce pollution by landscape measures. So one more example from Kaunas, the second biggest city in Lithuania. In red is, you see the what's Irina in the island, in the river island. And when we switch it to the information of tidal areas, you can see that orange represents 10% probability, blue color presents a 10% probability, and the orange presents 1% probability. So even blue and orange colors, they are covering the existing buildings. So it's a question how we do we design buildings in such a way that they avoid these places. And the third important thing is, of course, water, sustainable urban drain system. So what can we do with water? We can use more rainwater on site, not discharging it somewhere else, but using it more on site in order to achieve zero water balance. And water is very much related to landscape and related to plants, because we know that plants can only grow and flourish when they are irrigated, when they have water supply. Also related to that is urban flora and fauna. Of course, it's quite a contradictory question. Do we need all the fauna in the city? Probably not, but many fauna could really coexist with humans. So our task would be to safeguard local flora and fauna. This is a map, the topography map of Vilnius city, and even the residents of Vilnius city who live in town could hardly recognize, because now it is shown without any buildings and without any infrastructure elements that are built on top. And you can nicely observe the riverbed, which is much wider than just this blue line which exists now. And in many cases, looking on a big picture, big portrait of a city topography allows us to feel this character. The reason why I show this, that we could always, which shows you the arrow, we can see in what system of relationship is it with all the neighboring context of the city. And when we address the relief, it is of course the protected and valued element on site, the modern, during the construction cycle. In many cases, the companies try to straighten the land plot, make it completely flat, only then they can build. But of course, this is not a good, not sustainable way to do so. We have to protect, of course, in compositional terms, in ecological terms, and other things. And of course, we have to regenerate in many cases if topography was destroyed on site, if it was straightened, or it was abused by previous construction patterns. And of course, water cycle, if you put water on this model, so it goes as it goes in reality. So water always goes a very natural process, and it goes where it should go. So what can these principles give us in terms of site selection? As I said, when a site is selected for certain interventions, be it a municipal plan or a private investment, there are always options. And having these aspects in mind, we can create a sort of assessment proposal or self-assessment proposal, when we could compare version A and version B to different or 3 different land plots, having in mind these aspects that we have discussed already. So for example, the construction cost is always lower in the existing plots than the new, because in the new plots you have longer distances, probably longer driving distances, and there is no infrastructure. We have to develop new infrastructure. Maintenance is also complicated. what concerns landscape. So sometimes the existing urban areas might have heat island effect, and then certain actions should be taken to reduce it. But in new developed areas, more and more frequently we meet light pollution effect, which also has to be reduced. So finally, I'm just showing you the slide which you can use for making like a self-assessment and asking yourself the question, is my site selection sustainable? And collecting the information just by yourself and answering to the questions like site location, physical safety and water cycle, and then assessing have you addressed or you have not addressed. It would be very easy to reduce this system to sustainability assessment. So in all countries, also including Lithuania and in Hong Kong, you have a beam system, very nice beam system. And I was looking for assessment of certain buildings, and I noticed that you have really outstanding examples on this green building site, green building Hong Kong. But as you know, the sustainability assessment systems give a reduced or simplified picture of the world. So I think as professionals, we should try and look on all the complexity and see all the complicated issues and all the multiplicity of possible solutions in our projects. And of course, sustainability assessment systems are very good when we address third parties, when we have to talk to client, to municipality, and to investor, to people. It's very good to compare. But as professionals, I think we have to look deeper into the question. So my advice would be, as a result of my speech, I would say that we have to avoid the places, we just had a nice presentation that places are needed for agriculture, and they might be very productive and very useful also for urban residents. It's quite countries are placed in agriculture fields. So I'm always asking myself the question, do they produce more use as electricity, or we could have more use from them like from agriculture areas? So probably we have to find the answers to this question ourselves each time. We should also avoid non-built areas. We should avoid wetlands. We should try not to be very close to water features, for example, 50 meters, which is used in Lithuania. And we should be careful local fauna and public sport and greenways. In this way, we can look on different light on every project that is version project that is very usual to happen in modern cities. In case I'm showing to you the picture of version project in Vilnius city, when the former stadium, you see the round-shaped stadium, it's in the center, and it was 10,000 stadium when it is put into the office place. So by these important aspects, we could assess the project and say, is this conversionable or how much? Conclusion like that could be considered from a particular development aspect and also from a global perspective, or at least the whole perspective. We can also assess the impact of local intervention on all ecosystem and on long-term human needs, because these are very much related things, as we see. The construction of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 buildings is affecting the context, the things, and if it is interfering too much, so it might be also decreasing life quality of the residents. Finally, what is the goal? Maybe this goal is still a dream, and maybe it will take us a long time to achieve, but I would say that we have to probably move from the buildings and from the built-up areas that are less bad, less harming to the projects that are part of a system and that increases its value, that are regenerative projects. So thank you for your attention. I'm open to your questions now. Sylvia, colleagues, if you have questions, you can ask or you can type in chat as well. Or to say what is your, or in China or in Japan or in other places that you live or where you have practiced.
Hello. Oh,
Yes, please.
Because Sophia just not in the room now, so I just welcome every tutors from overseas. If you have any questions or students, if you would like to ask, please either type or you can talk through your mic. But at the same time, I do have a question to ask. Right now, our site is very small scale.
Yes,
compared to the case study you just presented. It's a bit different in terms of the scales. So do you have any suggestion? Do you have any other cases? How do we do with this kind of small scale villages at the same time able to balance the development and also to keep the local culture?
Thank you for your question. You know, the specifics of the work of architect and urban design is that you should be able, and probably in your practice you get different type of projects, big scale and small scale projects, as you just mentioned. But the principles and the methodologies, they don't change from the scale. They just different tools come on the stage. For example, the small scale development has a more implementational approach, and it has more analytic approach of these small elements that exist on site. Probably it's a good thing to look on the area, on the existing urban area in the way of these primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary patterns, which are sometimes difficult to distinguish from the first point of view. When you come on the place, we all just see the surface. And then, of course, looking on the way the place is living, it's very important, because, you know, it takes a long time to develop communities and their traditions, but you can ruin this very, very fast if you just send people away or you demolish the place. And it looks sometimes that it's very easy. We can build new buildings, new nice glazed buildings, and we will have a new type of community. But in most of the projects, that never happens. When you ruin the existing social relations, it takes again 100 or so years to develop the new ones. And we know that the modern way of construction is such that the relation between people are very weak, be it residents or be it an office building. So people communicate on their professional side, but they don't communicate so much human beings. And small-scale development, what I saw in Pokfulam, morphological grain of much greater, much bigger conditions and much better situation for people to communicate. Of course, there is always a question, 21st century image for a place like you show. We also have such questions, for example, in the downtown areas. You know that in many cases, local residents move away and they give their apartments for offices or for rented apartments. So finally, there are no residents on the place. So in each place, in each case, I think you have to be attentive. And first, a landscape architect and urban designer should be a looker and listener. And only after that, he can be generating something.
Yeah, I think you are talking. I think Buffalo is a very good example to show that kind of community. That kind of they do have the sense to do the bottom-up design. They really know what the village wants, and then they tell the government or tell the designer to welcome to implement the design together with the villagers. So that's, I think, is a very good listening within the Buffalo village. They do have this kind of a dynamic happening.
Yeah, I agree fully with you. It's very good to involve local people. Can take you very high and depends on what is the tradition, what is the communication with local residents. The use of community, of course, the primary use of community is to get some ideas from them. But I would say this is a sort of a used, applied approach of participation. But you can also have in mind that if public participate in the project, they would be also protecting the place after it is implemented on the place, and they can take over some duties and some responsibilities, because if they are satisfied, they like to protect this place and try to keep it as it is. And this is again meets one of sustainable development goals, because long-term use, then the buildings and the facilities and the places, open places, can stay in a condition as they are for longer time. So this is exactly what we want to achieve.
How about from other students, Japan, Korea, Thailand, or Turkey? Any student have question would like to ask or discuss? You could also type.
Yeah, you could use chat.
Yeah.
Hello, Professor. My name is Nam from Thailand. So I would like to ask about the comparison of the potential in terms of high density development, mixed use, some kind of the project around the oversized area. It's like a high-rise building, residential for upper income people. And do you think how high of the risk and the threat that going to impact to the community like Pokfulam village, who sit in the middle of that kind of mixed-use area in the city like Hong Kong, and what going to reduce the impact and sustain that kind of community to amplify the voice from the community to speak out and to make the more power to negotiate with the government or developers to take over the land.
Yeah,
because I think you have many experience on the big complex projects. So what do you think about that kind of weather and lower income people?
You know, in every city we have a challenging situations, including also Vilnius, capital of Lithuania. We have situations where new development is slowly crawling on top of the former existing patterns from the 19th and beginning of the 20th century development. And these are very difficult processes that are out of influence of architects and urban designers. They are more political processes. It's more like agreement in the city, a sort of convention between the investment and the city planning and the residents. So it's very hard to give ready recipes. I would, as long as you have a nice group of young professionals, so I would suggest that you might be developing certain alternative scenarios for this place. Alternative scenarios might help you to have a closer look on possible consequences or possible impact, as you say, and try to draw the scenario line from the beginning until some foreseeable future, let's say 50 years. One professor from Helsinki said that we should plan in certain range and look for the impact in certain range that is above our living age. Then we don't have personal interest in that. And this is a very interesting point of view. So if you have different scenarios, let's say A, B, C scenario, you could develop how this would evolve in terms of social relationship, in terms of spatial arrangement, in terms of even economical impact, in terms of residents' satisfaction, in terms of biodiversity and ecological value of the place. And then you can put on these weights different aspects, and then you can have a very nice discussion about that. What do we think about these consequences? Which are acceptable for us, and in which places we are very doubtful? I would say you could also open your discussion circle to the local residents and also ask people what do they think about these consequences, because it's very hard for people, for ordinary residents, it's hard to create scenarios and forecast certain impacts and certain outcomes. But professionals are needed for that, because we can draft scenarios and we can say that given all our professional knowledge and experience, we can forecast that the consequence, for example, of going this way would be like this and this and this. And then the feedback from the population, also from city authorities, might be very interesting and very useful. So this would be a very nice outcome of your workshop when you put forces together. And you know, these questions are quite complicated. This is not like a designing some suburban villa, because you have multi-layered cultural environment with lots of infrastructure and lots of existing issues on the place. So you need a group of different professionals, people with different experience in landscape, in infrastructure, in architecture, in urban planning, in economy, in sociology, maybe even. In psychology, maybe even. And then addressing the issue and the scenario from different points might help you to generate these expected consequences in different aspects, and then you can discuss about them. In each case, the decisions are taken on the place, and decisions and certain movement and certain actions happen only if there is a majority of will, majority of approval towards them. You can create very nice idea, but if nobody picks it up, so it remains on paper.
Yeah, so far, I think for the Pokfulam village, they have a lot of different supporting groups, and one of which is Caritas. It's a local NGO with a few social workers who have been working with the villages and have been trying to negotiate with the government on different things that will help the village and also help the livelihood of the villagers. And in fact, actually, I had to step out because I got a call from Caritas just now, and I was taking the opportunity to ask her a lot of questions for the workshop. So I missed a bit of your lecture. Sorry for that.
No problem.
But I think definitely. For every place, and especially a place as in a way fragile as Pokfulam village, really need to have a good plan for the next 50 years. I mean, I agree with you on looking ahead. You know, whatever that we're thinking of proposing now, of course, it's for the short term, but it's also what is ahead. You know, are we working towards something? And I wonder, you know, it's a question we haven't really asked the villages yet, because we had so many other questions already to try to get this very complex place around our head. And so we haven't really asked this particular question, because through the 50 years in Pok-Fu-Lam, it has evolved so much based on their culture and based on how they use their land. And now at this point in time, 2021, it's very different from 50 years ago. And so what would be 50 years from now? It's a very good question to ask. Yeah, and I think with your lecture, we really feel the distance from you, because we we had a lot of internet problems. So there were times that you were speaking very slow, and there were times you were speaking very fast. so we lost connection a little bit.
I see.
Yeah. So,
but still we were still able to communicate. I will just have one comment on planning, which you mentioned. In the end of 20th century, planning was considered like something when you prepare a nice plan, nice picture, council approve it, you put it on the wall, and then you say the life should go like this. Now it's a little bit different, because life is quite dynamic and the changes take place very rapidly. So plan is a good guideline, and it's just setting a priority, and it's in no way the goal, the final picture that you have to achieve in 50 years. It's just a road for you. And each moment, each day, or each year, each 5 years, you have to look again and refresh this aspects that were planned, because the situation is changing and the economy is changing and people are changing, and therefore the plan is a good guideline. It's quite different from the previous time.
okay, how are we doing with time? I think, yeah, it's time to give all our visitors, I mean, not visitors, our lecturers, a round of applause. Again, I can't clap. Everybody can help me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if Professor Makoto is still here. Oh, yes. Yes. Hello there.
Hi
Yes,
there.
thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
as
Not
well.
so far away to very far away. Thank you. Thank you again. So now we're going to go to the next session, and we're going to discuss with the groups on the strategies we have to come up with for the villages. Yeah. So goodbye. Thank you again.
Bye-bye
Hope to see
now.
you
Thank you
soon.
so much.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Well,
We'll
Good
see you
luck.
soon again.
bye-bye.
Bye now.
Okay, we have a break. Yes, I think we all need a break.
1 hour.
And let's see, 15?
50.
1
So
5?
we start because from the schedule we should
already-
end at 4:30 and
Yeah,
come back after 30 minutes after.
come back at 5?
from
Is
the
it okay?
schedule. Yeah.
Too soon? Okay. Okay.
So,
Let's see. Let me just think. I need to write
or
down.
if we want short break and then we can finish earlier if you want.
I think maybe we just take 15 minutes for now, and then we can proceed to the group. And I think what we like to do is, I know we've given you a link, but we don't want you to leave this room, because it's, you have to leave the room and come to another one. So just stay in this one. Yeah, stay in this one. Don't leave, and perhaps just switch off your camera, your sound,